I'm glad that we agree with Latin America on this one, that it should be one of the top three. But we suggest that in terms of focusing on NAP, in terms of the wording, we should talk about adaptation planning.
Malawi, Cambodia, and Nicaragua are just a few of the countries represented at the Southern Voices workshop in Kathmandu. It serves as a platform to discuss and co-create new joint principles on adaptation to climate change. Each representative brings their own story of how climate change is affecting people in their country.
The impacts of climate change are affecting poor people badly. Malawi is an agro-based economy, and the people depend on rain-fed agriculture. So with the impacts of climate change now, you cannot plan in terms of when are we going to have the onset of rains and how much rain are we going to have. And so it makes people very, very vulnerable.
We are already having the impacts of those of hurricanes or the changing on the climate conditions. It seems like the country, or that we will have more problems with droughts, with floods. So we really need to adapt in all the sectors.
Since COP15 was held in Copenhagen in 2009, Southern Voices has been working towards strengthening the voice of people most vulnerable to climate change in international climate negotiations and in domestic climate policies. National governments in developing countries have signed up to international agreements to strengthen the resilience of their societies, economies, and local communities to the impacts of climate change. However, this is largely a gray area with little progress being made.
Communities have a limit to how much they can do on their own. There are certain things that you need investment in terms of infrastructure. If you have to promote irrigation, you need to have the necessary infrastructure in place, and that requires that someone should provide the funding, and that requires government to put in resources for such kind of adaptation measures. And so as networks, as civil society, we have a role to make sure that we encourage that, make sure that our governments are able to commit to adaptation financing, but also that when they are coming up with plans like the national adaptation plans that we talk about, maybe even the national adaptation programs of action, that they are able to take into consideration specific needs that are coming from communities.
The basic idea behind creating the joint principles on adaptation is that advocacy by civil society for pro-poor adaptation policies will be strengthened if they work together across countries.
By building the strategic alliance from the national network to the regional network, we also can bring good practice and lesson learned from other countries and replicate it in our country. And we also can share what we collect from the community-based network, and then advocate to the regional and international government agency, especially the policymaker who develop a good policy with benefiting the poor, the more vulnerable who are affected by climate change.
Based on initial contributions from a number of civil society networks from across the world, a set of 7 principles has now been developed. Those are ready to be tested on a national and community level.
We had first the national inception workshops, and then a first draft of the principle was developed. But then when all of the networks were together, we could develop something more.
The joint principles on adaptation can be used to help guide civil society organizations in advocating for national adaptation policies, enter a dialogue with government, or to improve capability building efforts.